It's just like toilet paper, isn't it? It's like it's an office product. It's something that, is required. Otherwise, it gets very interesting in your seat. That's what I would say.
Jacinta Gulakasakaram, co-founder of Dignity NZ, well done, and thank you very much for being with us on the panel. And Jacinta presented a petition on the issue back to Parliament, in 2019 there. Quite a response here on water safety and actually the decision, or actually the debate that Wellington City Council is having for bringing back the charge to under 5s for going to the local pool there. Kia ora, Wallace, quite apart from water skills, having it free is a huge thing for poor families, especially in the school holidays. Sure, middle-class families aren't going to blink at paying a couple of bucks for a child, but the ability of one auntie or uncle to take a whole lot of cousins to the pool for the day for free because all the other parents are working and can't take time off to look after them is huge. The issue of local body infrastructure funding is huge, and pool fees are not going to solve it. A large response to that issue. Regarding recycling, has anyone tried disposing of polystyrene lately? Landfill won't accept it and no one recycles it. Are we supposed to have purpose-built sheds at home to house it? And Kate Bush. I was obsessed as a young teen with the image of Kate Bush on her Lionheart album jacket. I can still see her iridescent eyeshadow and amazing hair. And someone has just alerted us that there is an annual Kate Bush Day in Brisbane.
Of course there is.
Everything Kate.
As opposed to everything Bush.
You'll have to go, Penny.
I don't actually love Kate Bush.
Oh, you don't?
No, I like Kate Bush. I enjoyed lip syncing to Kate Bush because it was funny, and I did the arms and the eyes. But that's actually the only song I could name you off the top of my head.
All right, okay.
I know that you like her, though. I can just tell.
I absolutely love Kate Bush.
There we go.
Just very, very briefly on this. We might sort of save it for tomorrow, but a bit of a heads up. But there was an interesting article and stuff regarding why we eat certain types of meat and why we don't. And they talked about veal, rabbit and goat. What's happened to veal, Andrew Hoggard?
Still there, but I'm not sure where you'd get it from.
Why do people not eat it anymore?
I have no idea, to be honest. I mean, it's viewed as a delicacy in Europe and that. Yeah, I mean, that's from the young calves. Everyone sort of loves lamb, but
well, I'd like to know.
Veal, and what's that?
Well, I'd like to know. What about rabbit? Have either of you tried rabbit?
No, I haven't.
Yes.
And what did you think of it?
My mother-in-law makes a fantastic rabbit pie, apparently.
Beautiful. And
she does. Yes.
And possum. Have either of you tried possum?
No. I'm not adverse to, if I've tried cricket. I had a cricket in Thailand, as you do, and I'm not one of these people that thinks animals are different. Like people that I wouldn't ever eat a dog or a cat or something. I don't see the different morally.
Well, that's where I'm going with this.
Oh, good.
I'd like to know out there if anybody has eaten possum, and away from the 1080 areas, is there a reason why we don't eat it?
Don't know, but you can come and see me on Saturday in Hamilton with my hot sauce. Did you like my segue?
What's happening there?
That's what I'm doing, hot sauce. It's a one-woman comedy show. Songs.
Out of time. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a decade on from Christchurch's deadly quakes, a dying man is using his final days to fight his insurer. Why has it come to this? Do we want thousands of New Zealand kids growing up in motel rooms? Because right now, 4,000 of them are. The COVID vaccinators are about to get the jab starting tomorrow. No new community cases today, but a potential lead in the hunt for the source of the infection. A gale force ship storm is blowing over the America's Cup, with accusations of honourless self-interest flying all over the place. And Facebook calls the Aussie government's bluff and bans people from sharing local news on its platform.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister is staying out of a stoush between Australia and Facebook. The social media giant is blocking Australian news content on its site in response to a proposed law requiring both it and Google to pay news publishers. Jacinda Ardern says Australia has taken a different path to New Zealand in how it deals with Facebook.
I'll happily do it.
Jacinda Ardern says anything that doesn't sit right with New Zealanders she raises with Facebook, the Christchurch terror attacks being one example. No new community cases of COVID-19 have been reported today as thousands of Aucklanders continue to be tested. However, the COVID response minister Chris Hipkins says everyone in New Zealand will still be required to wear masks on public transport in light of the Papatoetoe outbreak. Cabinet will review the mask guidelines on Monday, along with whether Auckland should move down to level 1. A GP who has helped design the COVID vaccine rollout says he's confident it will be effective and safe. Health authorities have done a dry run to spot any potential teething problems. The final stage of preparation will be some of the vaccinators themselves being vaccinated in Auckland tomorrow. Joe Bourne says the practice run included patient role plays.
We know that there's so much publicity around the delivery of this programme, and people will talk to each other about what the experience was like. So the team felt that having somebody there and rehearsing the conversations that they will have in certain scenarios was really helpful for them.
Joe Bourne says practice scenarios have included vials being spilt. Official figures show hundreds of children have been living in motels for at least a year as the country's housing crisis worsens. Social agencies have long warned that rising house prices are making rents unaffordable for many families. Ministry for Social Development figures show that in September there were more than 4,000 households with at least one child living in emergency accommodation. More than 500 children have been living in motels for up to 12 months and nearly 100 have been there longer. You can hear more about this on Checkpoint. A jury has been urged to question if 3 indecent assault allegations about a prominent Auckland businessman are credible. The businessman who denies them is on trial in the High Court in Auckland. The man, who can't be named, also denies 2 charges of attempting to dissuade a witness. The Crown alleges he took opportunities with young men who came to him for help. Today, his lawyer David Jones implored the jury to keep an open mind.
Because the other side of the coin of being a wealthy philanthropist is that a lot of people are coming to you asking for money, and a lot of people are going to have to go away and they are going to be disappointed, disaffected, unhappy, because they are not up to the mark in terms of their abilities.
Lawyer David Jones. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment does not believe a departure tax would deter tourists. The tax is one of 4 recommendations Simon Upton has made to help the tourism industry become more sustainable. He says revenue from the tax could be used to develop low-emission aviation technologies and support Pacific nations facing climate challenges.
And it's not trying to use the cost of travel to change preferences. Rather, it's a way of very transparently saying we have a problem without a solution at this point. There is nothing we can do about those long-run emissions.
Simon Upton's other recommendations include making tourism infrastructure funding conditional on environmental criteria. It's 4 minutes past 5. Luna Rossa is continuing to feud with America's Cup organisers over when the Challenger final should resume. It believes racing should restart tomorrow now that Auckland's at level 2. In response, the organisers have reluctantly said the best of 13 series can resume on Saturday, having backed down on their proposal to further postpone racing by a week. Luna Rossa spokesperson Francesco Longanese Catani believes the way forward is clear.
The rules are there, you have accepted them, and the fairest thing that you can do in sport is to play with the rules that are set and respect them.
Francesco Longanesi-Catani. Mahi Drysdale faces stiff competition in his attempt to win a 10th men's single sculls national title. The Olympic champion has managed only the 5th best time in the heats at the New Zealand Rowing Championships in Twizel. Emma Twigg narrowly won the only heat in the women's single sculls. Wellington Phoenix vice-captain Alex Rufer is willing to play out of position to help the A-League Football Club overcome its injury crisis. Experienced defender Luke De Vere is out for up to 12 weeks with a serious knee injury, while fellow centre-back Joshua Laws is in doubt with an ankle injury. Rufer is a midfielder but is open to helping out the defence.
I'll happily do a job for the team anywhere, probably bar goalkeeper, but if the coach wants me to play right back, centre back, left back, wherever it may be, I'll play anywhere along the park.
Alex Rufer. That's the news.
The country returns to near normal.
I'm a bit on the fence about it at the moment. In my opinion, it is a bit of a risk.
But South Auckland doctors won't be letting their guard down.
We should be cautious and, let's hope they haven't jumped the gun.
And some good news on the global front as case numbers fall.
It's remarkable. I mean, the speed of the decline that we've seen. For the first time, an end is in sight.
News as it comes to hand. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, fine, apart from 1 or 2 showers in eastern Northland until tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated light showers clearing this evening. For all of the South Island, fine weather, apart from cloudy areas in Westland and Southland, mainly morning and night. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few light showers until tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A Christchurch man is using his dying days to battle his insurance company, a decade on from the deadly quakes. Brian Shaw owns an apartment that's in a block of 11. They were all damaged in 2011. Brian's a building consent officer and he says the technical reports in chasing a settlement with insurer Vero has already cost the unit owners about $400,000 and they still haven't made it through court. So tomorrow he'll be protesting outside Vero's Christchurch office with other unhappy customers because the clock is ticking down fast for Brian Shaw. He has terminal cancer with no more treatment options and he wants this insurance mess sorted so it's one less thing to leave his wife.
Last year I spent quite a bit of time early in the year in hospital. I have stage 4 cancer, bladder cancer, which is at the moment it's given me a reprieve. I've finished chemotherapy, and now I'm basically I guess you could say a ticking time bomb. I've only got whatever time I'm given before the cancer metastasizes, and then I'm basically downhill pretty fast. So at the moment I'm working because there are still bills to pay as a result of this situation. I don't wish to leave my wife of 41 years with this terrible situation because of the financial strain that it's put on us. We've needed to, instead of purchasing our own home, once I was required to move for my job, I've had to purchase a home with our son and daughter and our son-in-law. We live very happily with them, but...
You are desperate to get this sorted, basically, yes, because you don't want to leave a mess for your wife.
No, I don't, and it's complex, and, we need Vero's cooperation to get this out of the way, and they, as I say, they have just deliberately put obstacles in the way in the hope that we'll run out of energy, run out of money, run out of resolve. And but that's not going to happen. We want this in the public arena. We want people to know that this company that is advertising as being one that takes your worries away in the event of something going wrong is not what it is advertised as. Their behaviour is unconscionable considering the amount of delays that they have caused.
Brian, do they know you've got terminal cancer?
Yeah, our lawyers made that known to them, and it's appalling. We actually want an apology in the first instance. We, for their atrocious behaviour. It's deliberate, and this is known within the industry. that this is the way that insurers carry on.
Why can't you get it to court?
There's been numerous delays caused essentially by Vero, and every time that the topic comes up, there'll be documents that aren't ready on time. I can't really go into details because it's quite specific, and they would try and put excuses in the way, but we can actually explain away all of them. It's clearly a delay tactic. And it's been used on a lot of people. You'll know people that have presented themselves outside their offices and then been whisked away because of the attention that it's drawn, and then muzzled by a non-disclosure agreement, simply because they don't want the attention. They don't want people to know that this is what they're doing.
Brian, do you suspect that they're trying to run your clock down here?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Why are you protesting tomorrow?
We know that the anniversary of the earthquakes has come up. We haven't been able to get anywhere. It's come to the point where the other unit owners, members of the body court, we've just had enough. It needs to be in their face and right under their nose that they've behaved in an appalling way. They need to make an apology for it and do something to resolve this.
Brian, your medical condition aside, this must... Well, how's it left you feeling?
I feel pretty sad and disappointed that, the end of my life has to be tainted by having to deal with this. It's a sorrow that there's a lot of people that are going through this with insurance companies, and they'll know what I mean. It's a hollow feeling, and, you're not quite sure whether to be like Raging Bull or just a mess of tears. It's a horrible place to be in. And yeah, one of the reasons we're fighting this is I just don't want my wife to be left with having to deal with this mess, It's been very costly. It's been way too long, and they need to do something.
And that was Brian Shaw. The protest will happen outside Vero's Christchurch headquarters. And in the last few minutes, Vero has sent us a response. It says, "We understand this is in relation to a claim from a body corporate representing 11 unit owners. This claim came to Vero from EQC in 2016. We do want to resolve this," Vero says, "as quickly as possible and have approached the body corporate to again offer to attend mediation, which in our experience has been the most effective method for resolving complex claims. Unfortunately, the court process does involve a lot of delay. For example, Vero was preparing for a court date in May this year, but this was then postponed by the court. We are conscious that it has now been almost 10 years since the February 2011 quake, and we are sorry for the delay and empathise with the unit owners' frustrations." And that statement was from Vero. It is 12 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, a potential lead in the hunt for the source of the latest community COVID infection. There are now more than 4,000 children growing up in motels across New Zealand, devastating parents who are desperate to find a permanent place for their kids to live. Skyrocketing house prices are prompting many landlords to sell up, forcing up rents and making housing more and more unaffordable for many whānau. Latest figures from the Ministry for Social Development show the number of kids in motels is rising, and parents and teachers say it's impacting their mental health. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
Some tired-looking toys are the only sign of kids at this Auckland motel. There's nothing else indicating children stay, let alone live here. But previously just pit stops, motels are now permanent for thousands of families, like Ramona's.
Wouldn't choose us for anybody, Growing up, I didn't come from a rich family, but it was never anything this hard as what my children are going through, and it sucks. Yeah, what else is in there? Who's this?
Ramona and her partner have been here with their 3 kids since November. It's not a situation they ever expected to find themselves in.
We were in Australia and then COVID hit, and we didn't have any support there, so we decided to come home. And we were staying with my mother-in-law, but she's also in a social housing house, which was overcrowded, so we were asked to leave, and here we are.
She puts bars across her windows and her youngest isn't allowed to play outside because it doesn't feel safe. Her older kids are struggling too.
I know for my oldest daughter, who's almost 15, she hasn't told any of her friends that she lives in emergency housing. And, sorry, it's hard as a mum because you feel like you failed. Like, my daughter's embarrassed to tell her friends the truth, and it's, what else can you do?
She's constantly on the search for a rental while her partner works full-time at a warehouse, but his wage isn't enough to get them into the hugely competitive rental market.
Too expensive, there's so many other applicants, and you feel overwhelmed, but you have to do it. Windsor's telling me I have to apply for 5 to 6 houses a week, and I've said to them, sometimes there's no houses within my price range, and they're like, well, you need to find something. And they just, you need to be making sure you complete all your obligations, otherwise you're liable to pay, I think it's $2,800 a week for us to stay here. And we've been here 11 weeks, so that's over $30,000.
With public housing stretched well beyond its limits, the waitlist has now hit 22,000. More and more whānau are ending up in motels. Sky Richardson was here for 6 months last year after her previous rental sold.
So there was 5 of us in my one room. There was me, my 2 babies in the double bed, and then there was my oldest son who's 10 with his little sister who's 7 in one single bed. They have told me that it was the shittiest time of their life, like, to be honest.
She eventually managed to find a place for $700 a week, the bulk of her $940 weekly income. But she says they had to get out of this motel.
There's a lot of criteria that you have to meet to get into private rentals these days, so I was lucky to stumble upon the one that I've got now. It's not a way, like, kids are meant to be free, they're meant to be kids, they're meant to play, they're not meant to be stuck behind, you might as well say, jail cell bars, like stuck in one room. It's not right at all.
Figures released to Checkpoint show that in September last year there were 3,350 households with one adult and at least one child in motels. There were another 800 households with 2 adults and at least one child. That was an overall increase of more than 500 children on the previous 3 months, and the public housing waitlist has been steadily rising ever since. Whangarei's Hora School principal Pat Newman says he's seen the situation worsen over the past year.
At the moment we've got about 10 children that they're aware of. Now I use the word that they are aware of because we've probably got at least double if you take what we're not aware about, who are living in tents, motels, caravans or garages.
He says families simply can't afford rising rents.
People who have rental accommodation have been putting them on the markets to get the increases in what the house is valued at. And what's happening is that those renting those houses are being put out on the streets because they're being sold empty. And then the new owner is putting the rental up $100, $150 a week sort of thing.
And it's those with kids that he says are finding the housing crisis particularly dire.
The families that we're talking about here are worse off. First-time buyers tend to be already renting and in a house. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looking at the hope of having a deposit. What we're talking about is another level below the first-time buyers who are living in a tent, so the deposit isn't very great on that.
As of June last year, there were more than 1,000 kids who'd been in motels between 3 and 6 months, more than 500 living there between 6 and 12 months, and nearly 100 who'd been there between 1 and 2 years. Pat Newman says those figures are getting worse and they're taking their toll.
In a way, it's taking away hope for these kids. They see on television all the nice goodies that you should be able to get if you're a normal child, and yet they think that's not me.
In a statement, the Minister for Social Development, Carmel Sepuloni, says there is a major program of work underway aimed at increasing the supply of public housing and improving housing affordability. Next week, the government is scheduled to release its latest statistics around child poverty rates. numbers that families on the front lines of the housing crisis will be counting on improving. For Checkpoint, Cornita Blake-Person, Aho.
Now, if you were listening to that story, we will put Nick and Nita's piece up online so that you can view the video. Meanwhile, the government has no idea how big the housing shortfall actually is in New Zealand. The housing minister says there are so many different figures being thrown around, from 28,000 to 200,000. It's impossible to put a specific figure on it. Megan Woods faced several questions about how many houses are needed to fix the housing crisis from incredulous opposition MPs in Parliament this afternoon. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Housing's a topic that's put many a minister under pressure in the House over the years. Kiwi Build was a lightning rod for Labour in its first term, and questions about what the government's doing to boost housing supply just keep coming. Housing Minister Megan Woods was asked for the current and future forecasts of how many houses would need to be built to meet demand.
Anywhere between 28,000 and 200,000 homes. This range is based on estimates by many commentators and economists, and the precise figure is contested as there is not one set methodology for measuring the gap between supply and demand.
To make her point, she reeled off some of those estimates.
ASB, who forecast a gap of 60 to 65,000. Sense Partners, who forecast a gap of 28,000 to 45,000. Inframetrics, who forecast a gap of 40,000. ANZ, 60,000 to 120,000. And Ashley Church, who forecast 200,000.
National's Nicola Willis wanted to know what official advice the minister was receiving.
From her own Ministry of Housing and Urban Development about the size of the housing shortage in New Zealand, and if they don't monitor that, how does she know whether her policies are effective or not?
Mr. Speaker, the advice that I have received from officials that what we have is, depending on the methodology that is used in terms of forecasting, you can come up with any number.
Instead, Megan Woods says the government looks at regional areas to assess shortages of rentals of public housing and home ownership rates. Then a question from ACT's Brooke Van Velden.
How many new houses will be built this year due to policies implemented by this government?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have those figures directly on me, and across all typologies.
Megan Woods fired back when asked how many houses had been built under Kiwi Build.
I will put that record against the previous government's 100 affordable homes over 9 years in their special housing areas any day of the week.
Since 2017, the government's built more than 4,500 state homes and intends to exceed 18,000 by the end of 2024. However, that's been far outstripped by demand, with nearly 22,500 eligible households waiting for a state or social home at the end of last year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Really keen for your feedback on that one. We have 4,000 kids growing up in motel rooms right now. Are we comfortable with that? And if not, what can we do about it? And almost a decade on from those Christchurch quakes, should anyone be waiting on an insurance settlement? Let us know your thoughts. Get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Authorities have uncovered a new lead in their investigation over how COVID-19 made it back into the community, albeit a tenuous one. Health officials have so far been confounded by how 3 members of a South Auckland family caught the virus before testing positive on Saturday. Genome sequencing has now found a potential link with a guest in managed isolation 6 weeks ago, but officials caution it is still a highly unlikely option. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, explains.
All right, good afternoon, everybody.
And it is a good afternoon.
We have no further positive COVID-19 cases in the community to report today.
The COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, couldn't ask for more on Auckland's first day back in Level 2. Some 25,000 tests have been carried out since Sunday. The total number of cases found remains at 6. 135 people have been deemed their close contacts. Of those, 103 have tested negative, 28 are outstanding. The overwhelming majority of casual contacts have also tested negative, with just below 200 still to come back.
No further cases been identified as tests are processed from the community does provide continued reassurance that the swift response of the system continues to be highly effective in response to the Auckland February cases.
While that is reassuring, there are still no answers as to how the family at the centre of the outbreak contracted COVID in the first place. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says all scenarios are being investigated, but the most likely is still the mother's workplace, a laundry facility for domestic and international airlines.
The airport precinct seems the most likely route of infection of our original case, and we just need to get to the bottom of how she may have been exposed.
In particular, one option being explored is whether staff may have mingled with others at the laundry's break room.
We are investigating that, and that's why we have tested not just the co-workers in the laundry part, but all those working at that site.
Another possibility, albeit a remote one, has emerged in the past 24 hours. Genome sequencing has found a potential link to a person who arrived in New Zealand with COVID around Christmas. The guest, who isolated at the 4 Points by Sheraton Hotel, had a similar but not identical strain of the virus as the new cases.
Whether there was a potential link from that case through one of the guests who may have left through to our cases that we found on the weekend. It seems very unlikely because of the time period and what would need to have happened to create that epidemiological link, while at the same time we were finding no other cases out in the community.
Those who stayed at the hotel around the same time have been asked to take a test if they've had symptoms. But for now, the answer remains elusive. The investigations continue. Still, the government is confident in the current alert level settings, along with the extra precautions in place. For one, face coverings are now mandatory on public transport nationwide until at least Monday.
Just look after each other, keep us safe.
Kind of safety status quo is probably the best way to go, and I'm quite happy to wear a mask.
I'd rather be safe than sorry. I definitely think it's a good idea for safety and peace of mind.
The next few days will hopefully bring even more peace of mind. Tomorrow, the crew who will vaccinate New Zealand's border workers will themselves receive the jab. Then on Saturday, they'll start vaccinations. Another layer of protection it's hoped will prevent a repeat of this week's COVID scare. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A wealthy, influential businessman who took opportunities with 3 young men who came to him for help. That's how a man on trial has been described to the jury at the High Court in Auckland today. The businessman, who has interim name suppression, denies indecently assaulting the 3 men and making 2 attempts to dissuade a witness. Katie Todd was in court, and a warning: some details in her report are distressing.
The 3 complainants in the case don't know each other, but Crown lawyer Simon Foote told the jury they all have similar stories. He told the court over a period of more than 15 years, all 3 were indecently assaulted by the prominent New Zealand businessman at his house. He says one man went there in 2001 to discuss a charity deal, but unexpectedly found he was the only guest and was asked by the businessman if he wanted to cuddle. It's alleged the man tried to leave and the accused thrust his hands down his pants, grabbing onto his genitals while the man tried to wrestle free. Mr. Foote says the man didn't tell anyone what happened for years.
For many years, he tried essentially to shake it off, to get over it.
Mr. Foote says the businessman groped another man's bottom and kissed him on the neck while showing him around his house in 2016. He says the 3rd complainant was at the man's house in 2008 when he fell ill with food poisoning and went for a lie down. Mr. Foote says the defendant, wearing only black underwear, followed the man to the bedroom, joined him in the bed and groped his genitals. When the man decided to tell the police about the alleged assault, Mr. Foote says the businessman made 2 attempts to dissuade him by offering $15,000 and then work opportunities in exchange for his silence. The businessman is accused of getting people to help him, including the other defendant and people who work in public relations. The jury was told they will hear evidence of meetings in Auckland and the Gold Coast, evidence the Crown says implicates the businessman and the other defendant.
In what becomes quite an elaborate, if poorly executed, plot.
Mr Foote told the jury the trial is a simple case about a man who took opportunities with people he had influence over.
Who took advantage of others by using his powerful and influential position in criminal ways. First, he indecently assaulted 3 young men who had come to him for help.
The lawyer for the defence, David Jones, told the jury they need to keep an open mind and set aside what he called the Crown's cynical and negative connotations about the businessman. He asked them to question if the 3 men's accounts were credible.
Because the other side of the coin of being a wealthy philanthropist is that a lot of people are coming to you asking for money, and a lot of people are going to have to go away and they are going to be disappointed, disaffected, unhappy, because they are not up to the mark in terms of their abilities.
The trial before a jury of 9 women and 3 men is expected to take 5 weeks. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
A spat's broken out between challengers for the America's Cup over when to return to the water following Auckland's Level 3 lockdown. The organisers, America's Cup Events, wants to postpone racing until the city returned to Alert Level 1. But after pushback from challengers of record, Luna Rossa, they backpedalled, proposing racing in the Best of 13 series start again on Saturday. And after much back and forth today, Luna Rossa, who are 4-0 up over Team UK, have finally agreed to the terms. America's Cup reporter Felicity Reid has more.
It's been a year since race conditions for the Challenger Selection Series finals was signed off between all relevant parties, well before the full force of COVID-19 was felt by sports here and around the world. Now teams are living and racing in different times. Event organisers want fans. Luna Rossa want to follow the rules to the letter of the law. The Italians are refusing to budge and adamant about sticking to the time period allocated to the final series, which they say apply in all cases, from not enough wind through to natural disasters and a pandemic. Challenger of Record representative Francesco Lognesi-Catani believes the way forward is clear.
The rules are there, you have accepted them, and the fairest thing that you can do in sport is to play with the rules that are set and respect them.
That position's been labelled inflexible in a statement from ACE, who says the Challenger of Record want to continue racing against the interests of the public and commercial benefits to the city and businesses. ACE thinks they've met their visitors' demands halfway, but Luna Rossa disagree. Lognesi-Catani reckons they're giving Team UK a helping hand by pushing for racing as soon as possible.
The fact that they comment that the core is just pushing for Luna Rossa, I disagree, because the opportunity of racing gives Ineos more chances to win races and to win on the water the competition. If we were delaying the racing, the chances for Ineos to recover their current scoring would be minor.
Race director Ian Murray is in favour of racing under Alert Level 2 as long as all the on-water safety measures are in place. He called off any potential racing today because he couldn't get the patrol team together, and he might be in that position again.
One of the requirements has been very consistently there from the beginning is to maintain a safe on-water operation, and that relies heavily on over 100 volunteers that have been trained to man the safety marshalling boats around the course. We had a meeting this morning to discuss that, and obviously, because these people are volunteers and some of them are in some restrictions and bits and pieces, there's a fair bit to work through there.
Under Alert Level 2, the America's Cup Village on Auckland's waterfront will be shut, and public screenings of the racing won't go ahead. Racecourses which offer the best viewing from land won't be used either, in an attempt to limit large gatherings of spectators at popular vantage points. The government has weighed in on the racing without fans, a move Sports Minister Grant Robertson hopes is temporary.
Obviously disappointing for people who wanted to go and watch the races, but I learned a long time ago that the politics of the America's Cup is very, very complicated indeed. So, there are plenty more races to come in the regatta, and I'm sure New Zealanders will get to enjoy them.
The current rules state there'll be 2 races a day. Any move to 3 races to get the schedule completed in a shorter time frame would need to be agreed to by the Challenger of Record and the defender, Team New Zealand, which means the disagreements could keep coming. The eventual winner of the Challenger Selection Series finals will be back to take on Team New Zealand in the America's Cup next month. For Checkpoint, Felicity Reid.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, all schools will get free period products after the government extends its trial. Facebook one-ups the Aussie government ahead of legislation that would see it paying for news content. And we'll have more on the America's Cup throwdown. Why can't they all just play nicely? We would love your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Official figures show hundreds of children have been living in motels for at least a year as the country's housing crisis worsens. Social agencies have long warned that rising house prices are also making rents unaffordable for many families. Figures from the Ministry for Social Development show that in September there were more than 4,000 households with at least one child living in emergency accommodation. Meanwhile, the Housing Minister has told Parliament it's nigh on impossible to put a number on the housing shortfall, as there is no one methodology. Megan Woods says there is a shortfall of anywhere between 28,000 and 200,000 homes, based on estimates by commentators and economists. A GP who has helped design the COVID vaccine rollout says he's confident it will be effective and safe. Health authorities have done a dry run to spot possible teething problems. The final stage of preparation will be some of the vaccinators themselves being vaccinated in Auckland tomorrow. Joe Bourne says the practice run included patient role plays and scenarios such as vials being spilt. Turkish authorities have told New Zealand officials the children of a New Zealand citizen detained at the border because of suspected links to Islamic State are in good health. Suhaira Aden had dual nationality, but Australia stripped her of citizenship last year. The Foreign Affairs Minister says she received an update this morning informing her that the children, aged 2 and 5, are both fine. The Prime Minister hopes free period products in schools will result in fewer students missing class. All primary, intermediate, secondary school and Kura students will have access to free period products from June. Jacinda Ardern says the goal is to address the 1 in 12 children who are potentially missing school as a result of something half the population experiences. More than 20 Art Deco events are still going ahead in Napier this weekend, despite the cancellation of this year's Art Deco Festival. It was canned because of uncertainty about the COVID alert levels. Several music events and golf tournaments will still be on, along with dinners in both Napier and Hastings. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time to get down to business with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, you've got two significant financial results from companies today. Who are they?
Yeah, that's Sky City and Auckland International Airport, and their results stand in stark contrast to those upbeat results we got from the likes of Fletcher Building and EBOS yesterday. And starting with Auckland International Airport, anyone could have predicted that their profits would be hammered by the pandemic. And for the 6 months to December, its net profit was down 80% to $80 million. COVID-19, it's cut its passengers coming through the airport by 70%. The flow-on effect is that its revenue is down by 2/3.
80%.
80%.
Right.
Yep. We're talking big numbers here. The only thing keeping the company in the black, though, was its cost cutting and the profit it generates from commercial property, because Auckland Airport owns all that valuable property around the airport there in South Auckland. If anyone's been going to the airport here in Auckland recently, they'll notice how much roadworks there is, because there's so much going on there by way of development. So the company is calling. They've been calling for some sort of path back towards any semblance of international travel. What that may be, we do not know, but the company, they at least don't expect it to be in the next 6 months, because they haven't even priced that into its full year profit guidance, which they're actually expecting to report an underlying loss. So the company has closed down about 1% or 7 cents to about $6.90 per share. And the other big company today that put out its half year report was Sky City. And its net profit was down 76% to about $78.5 million. And that's because they don't have tourists coming through its hotel or sitting down and betting in their casinos. If there is one bright spot for the company, it was that its online gaming business that it runs through a subsidiary all the way in Malta, that's been booming. It has about 30,000 active online customers, and word is that they expect that to only increase over the rest of the financial year. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on to see what sort of impact that had on their results when they put that out in about August. And also with this company, it did announce its new Chief Financial Officer, Julia Amy, who replaces Rob Hamilton, who was part of that cohort of senior executives that all abruptly left at once. So they've solidified that position. No more question marks hovering over that. Their Chief Marketing Officer, I don't think that I haven't seen. I don't think they've announced a replacement there yet. So its share price, it was up a whisker to $2.88 a share.
Okay. And you've got news of a new company that's ready to make a debut on the NZX.
I know, this is a little bit exciting. That's 3 companies now that have announced that they're going to list on the NZX.
A practical rush.
Yeah, pretty much. So we got word today that the vehicle retailer and finance company called NZ Automotive Investments will debut next week. And this company, it's about 10 years old, owns 2 businesses. One of them our listeners probably have heard of before. That's the used car retailer Too Cheap Cars. And it's got this other vehicle financing business called NZ Motor Finance. The two marry very well together. People wanting to buy cars and finance it to do so. And the company will debut under what is called a compliance listing, and that's when a company will be on the NZX main boards, and it will still be subjected to all of the compliance and regulations around full disclosure, but the company won't be raising any money when it lists. And this is the second compliance listing of the year. Last week, that was Third Age Health, which debuted, and the reason for this is that the company says it has no real need to raise capital at the moment. That's something that they're planning to do in the future, and that would be to fund the expansion of its finance business. It sells about 11,000 used cars every year, which they say is about 8% of total used car sales in this country. And while they'd probably love to grow their market share and take on the likes of someone like Turner's, which I believe are the biggest used car retailer in the country, they say that the real opportunity for growth is in the financing side of things. They say 1 in 3 people who buy a car from them need finance, and rather than just receive a commission by referring them to someone else, they reckon, why don't we just all do this in-house and take the profits for ourselves? So that's what they're planning to do. The company will have a reference price of about $1.30. It gives the company, values the car company at about $59 million, which is sort of on the smaller side, but still a significant amount.
And what other numbers have you got for us today?
So on the back of those downbeat reports, the results that came out today, the NZX actually closed down 40 points to 12,633. Our dollar is at 71.8 US cents, 92.7 Australian, and 51.9 British pence. 57. Wow, that would be amazing.
Bad writing on your pad there. 51.9 is the final number, is it? Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton there with Business News. The ship storm continues to brew over the Prada Cup final that will be raced this weekend after a very public throwdown between the challenger of record and America's Cup organisers ACE. Effectively, ACE wanted to wait until Alert Level 1 in Auckland was, that we were at Alert Level 1. That was so fans could watch it en masse. But core Luna Rossa demanded racing continue according to the rules. ACE is accusing Luna Rossa of being inflexible and self-interested while failing to demonstrate honour and respect for the country. Luna Rossa reckons ACE is just playing to the crowd. Well, joining us now to break this all down is AUT sailing professor Mark Orams. Mark, it sounds like we need to get them a sandpit rather than the ocean to play in. What do you think?
Yes, you got that right, Lisa. Boy, you had to pronounce that one very carefully, didn't you? A ship storm. Well done. Yes, unfortunately, this is another sordid story in a long history of these kinds of spats in the America's Cup. And I was hoping we might avoid it in this edition in Auckland, but here we are again. And this is really a symptom of a breakdown in the relationship. The once happy marriage between Luna Rossa and Emirates Team New Zealand is now well and truly over. And we're in the midst of a very ugly and acrimonious divorce, I'm afraid.
So who's right then? So Luna Rossa says, hey, these are the rules, let's just get on with it. And then ACE is saying, let's do what's best, basically, I suppose, for the economy and the viewers and everybody. So who's actually right?
Well, it depends on who you support. So if you're an Italian supporter in Luna Rossa, you are absolutely in favour of them. They are 4-0 up. There was a schedule put in place. There was a contingency plan around different alert levels should they occur in COVID. And it is clear that under a COVID alert level 2, racing can proceed. So if you're a Luna Rossa supporter, you absolutely want them to get on with it and to, from their perspective, to get this done and dusted so that they can move and plan to challenge Team New Zealand for the America's Cup in March. However, if you're an Ineos Team UK supporter or an Emirates Team New Zealand supporter, a delay is a good thing. Because it gives Ineos more time to try and fix their speed problems and to become more competitive. It prolongs the Challenger Series, which means that from an Emirates Team New Zealand perspective, the Challenger has less time to continue to develop their boat because they're focused on the racing. So it's one of those it depends on who you support kinds of things as to who you think.
Hang on. Mark, hang on for a second. Rules are rules, aren't they? If a particular game runs for a certain period of time, when the donger goes off, that's it. You can't say, oh, man, if I had another 3 minutes, I would have got another goal and won that. Rules are rules.
Yep, exactly. Or if you've made the Rugby World Cup final and you don't like sort of the weather forecast, or you've got an injured player who's going to recover, you don't get to say, well, actually, we'd like to defer the World Cup final for another week, thanks very much. So, you know, that's the Luna Rossa perspective. But this acrimony is a result of the breakdown of the relationship, which began about a year ago. And it's got to a point now where, unfortunately, they are pitted against one another. Just from my perspective, I'm actually even though I'm an Emirates Team New Zealand supporter through and through, I think fair's fair. Luna Rossa has got a point here. There's a scheduled race that's supposed to happen tomorrow, and under COVID alert level 2, this can occur safely without any danger to public health, as a number of other sporting events are recommencing. And so no reason why it shouldn't go ahead. It's going to go ahead anyway. They've prevailed in this, and it's happening on Saturday.
Given the way this thing unfolded, right, so Core was going to give their press conference and then they got pipped at the post by Ace, who stuck out this really strongly worded press release. And then Luna Rossa started jumping up and down and said, no, Saturday's too late, I'd rather race Friday, tomorrow. I mean, can we expect, given the fact that they're still going at it, in essence, it's going to get nastier and nastier?
Well, I think it will, yes, and not over tomorrow. I mean, tomorrow's not going to happen because Ian Murray, the regatta director, has said we can't get ready in time. So it will happen Saturday, and then by Sunday we could potentially have our challenger, assuming that Luna Rossa wins 3 out of the 4 races scheduled on the weekend. And as we get closer and we get to the business end of this regatta and who might get to win the 36th America's Cup, I can expect this sort of acrimony and game playing and so on to get worse. It's a real shame because yachting's a great sport. It's a sport I've loved all my life, and this off-water stuff does it no favours in the wider public's eye. It just brings out the worst in people, and I'd hope we'd avoid it, but unfortunately we're heading down that path again.
Buckle up, it's going to be interesting. Thanks for joining us. That is AUT sailing professor Mark Orams. Facebook has banned Australians from sharing or viewing any local news content on its platform. The drastic move follows the federal government's proposed legislation that would force companies like Facebook and Google to pay for the content they share on their sites. Our World Watch reporter Paulina Lau has more.
What started out as a daring threat has now been followed with action. Australians are now blocked from accessing local news in their Facebook feeds. It's in response to legislation that would force major tech giants like Facebook and Google to pay for content they share on their platforms. It's a dramatic escalation in the standoff between Facebook and the federal government. Australia's Communications Minister, Paul Fletcher, says Facebook needs to think about how this looks.
They're effectively saying on our platform there will not be any information from organisations which employ paid journalists, which have fact-checking processes, which have editorial policies. They're effectively saying any information that is available on our site does not come from these reliable sources. Now, I would imagine that on quiet, sober reflection, reflection, they'll start to become quite troubled about what that would mean for how their platform is perceived.
Facebook says publishers get more from Facebook than it gets from them. The social media platform says it generated around 5.1 billion free referrals to Australian publishers last year, with an estimated $439 million. The company says what it gains from news content is minimal, making up 4% of what people see in their news feed. The Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance CEO, Paul Murphy, says Facebook's move is concerning but not surprising.
I mean, this is a company that has demonstrated its contempt for governments and for regulators around the world.
Australia's Treasurer Josh Frydenberg tweeted that he had a constructive discussion with Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg today, and that Mr. Zuckerberg raised issues with the News Media Bargaining Code, but that the conversation will continue and they will try and find a path forward. Facebook New Zealand says there's no comparable law here, so it cannot comment. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern often uses Facebook's live stream function to communicate to the public, but says that doesn't change her responsibility to raise issues with the company.
Obviously, Australia has chosen to take a particular path with their own legislation. We have not done that, but that's not to say that there aren't issues that we are working through in our own way, in our own time, and in many cases directly with Facebook.
Broadcasting and Media Minister Chris Farfoy says he's watching the issue closely.
Oh, look, I think it's pretty extreme, but if you're going to ask a question about what's happening here, we always say we're going to take a different approach to Australia. On the flip side, I think there's some encouraging signs of platforms talking directly to media and doing deals about paying for content, which I think is a lot further than we've been in the past.
Former CEO of Facebook Australia and New Zealand, Stephen Sheila, says Australians should be concerned.
But I think if this goes on longer term, this is a problem for Australia's data ecosystem and information ecosystem, which is a big problem for our democracy. I'm disappointed that Facebook has done this, because I do think it's... Imagine if a Chinese company, for example, had done this, sort of thrown a monkey wrench into Australia's democracy and information ecosystem, we would be up in arms. So I think this isn't a small thing. I think all Australians should be quite alarmed by this.
The block hasn't affected just news outlets. Non-news pages have also been impacted, including Western Australia's Department of Fire and Emergency Services. Small businesses have had their posts deleted, spelling trouble for those who've built their businesses on the back of social media platforms as a way to reach customers. Unlike Facebook, Google, which made similar threats to pull out of Australia over the new plans, is moving quickly to strike deals with major media companies, including 7 West Media, 9 and News Corp. A deal could be struck later down the road, but for now, Facebook is standing its ground and it knows the world is watching. For Checkpoint, Perlina Lau.
It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, we're in Papatoetoe as testing continues and the high school gets closer to reopening. But right now, let's get to some of your feedback. A number of you getting in touch about an earlier story with 4,000 kids growing up in motel rooms at the moment, according to official figures. This listener says this housing problem is totally unacceptable, and that includes temporary accommodation. All those in power with the ability to make change should be ashamed at this situation. Another listener says, I'm trying to build a new home, which includes a dependent living area for our old folk. Council has added at least 2 different fees of around $1,500 each for dependent dwelling, even though it's part of the same house. Where is the encouragement for family and community solutions to our housing crisis? Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. Monday marks 10 years since a 6.3 magnitude earthquake decimated Christchurch. In the lead up to that anniversary, Checkpoint has been in Christchurch meeting just some of the many Cantabrians whose lives changed that day. Matthew McKeegan had most of his life ahead of him when he died on February 22nd, 2011. The 25-year-old was a talented artist and designer, putting his skills to good use at the Southern Ink tattoo shop on Colombo Street. But when the earthquake struck, Bruce, Jay and Sarah McKeegan lost their much-loved son and older brother. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nate McKinnon with his story.
So when the police were at our door one night and I saw them there, I said to Bruce, don't let them in. I don't want to be told this.
Bruce and Jay McKicken always believed their son Matty would come home on February 22, 2011. He was at work at Southern Ink Tattoo Studio on Colombo Street. When the building crumbled, Matty, who had just that month celebrated his 25th birthday, never made it out. The text his parents and sister Sarah were so desperate to receive was never sent.
We all just kept leaving messages for Matthew. I remember one message I left. I said, I know you've got no money on your phone, Matty, but just get someone close by and just let us know that you're okay. And we went home and we just waited for him to come. We really thought he would come home.
Eventually there was a knock at the door, his boss's wife. The news wasn't good, but the McKickens simply couldn't process the loss of their boy.
I don't think we truly believed it until the police came knocking on our door 2 weeks later and said that Matthew had been identified. Right up to that moment, we thought that he had run and that he would come home, that they would find him.
The McKickens dragged themselves to the daily police briefings, hoping for a miraculous twist, that their son was somehow alive. It never came. Once Matty was formally identified, the family had just a couple of days to organise to say goodbye.
It was a nightmare when we still had to deal with the victim identification police, which was a whole day, and then go around to Matthew's flat that he'd just moved into, and we were told we needed to empty it out, and it was just, it was awful. And the reason we got up every day was because we knew we had the police briefings to go to at Burnside High School, and that kept us going because we thought there has to be news. Matthew would be somewhere. And then once Matthew was identified, we only had a couple of days to have his funeral, and it didn't hit home for a long time.
Jay says her husband isn't great at expressing his emotions. He prefers to bottle them up. And Bruce agrees with that. It's just what Kiwi blokes do, he says. He's become a leading voice representing the families who lost sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers on February 22. He's been particularly involved in the earthquake memorial on the Avon River in downtown Christchurch. Her husband won't admit it, but Jay reckons all of this has had an extra emotional toll.
I didn't think so, but Jay does.
Bruce came home emotionally drained every day. He was part of that. And it's amazing the way that Bruce, Sarah and I all deal very differently with grief. And Bruce is, he keeps a lot inside him. He's been very, very good support for Sarah and I. Where I guess Sarah and I talk a lot about it, Bruce would do the hugging and, it'll be all right. At the end of the day, we've got each other.
Adding to the family's pain has been the lack of justice since Matty's death. It's a sentiment shared by many of the families who lost loved ones in the quake, and the McKickens are no different. Harcourt's commercial property manager Christopher Chapman was charged in 2015 with misconduct by the Real Estate Agents Authority for failing to tell Southern Ink's owner the Colombo Street building was unsafe to occupy. A decision released in 2018 found Chapman's conduct substandard, but not disgraceful. A month later, the McKickens and family friends protested outside the real estate firm's Morehouse Ave office. They were asking for something simple, an apology.
Every other natural disaster you have, the government of the day seems to be hell-bent to get people to court to get that accountability. We've got no accountability. And I think that's going to be a legacy of this particular disaster.
Matthew McKicken should have celebrated his 35th birthday with family and friends this month. He should have been there when his sister got married late last year.
They all hurt. They all hurt. Yep. On Matthew's birthday every year, Bruce, Sarah and I go away somewhere for the day, and Matty used to like Akaroa and Hamner. So every year we say to Sarah, shall we still do this? And she says it's a family tradition that we started 10 years ago and we need to do this. So 2 days ago we went to Hamner, just the three of us. We walked through the forest and we said, Matt will be 35 today, so what would he have been doing? Would he have been married? Would he have had children? We talked a lot about what he would have been like.
What the McKickens do have are memories. They wear necklaces with his fingerprint on them. His guitar was in the gazebo where Sarah was married, and a chair, relocated from Christchurch's red zone and dedicated to Matty, sits near his parents' Broomfield home.
Last year, on the 10th anniversary, I went over there and there was an elderly couple there with 4 grandchildren. And they said to me, "You're Matthew's mother, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "We come here every anniversary day and we sit here with our grandchildren and we tell them about your son." And that was just so nice, so nice.
Matty's parents say their son had a heart of gold. He touched many a soul in Christchurch, so much so that 10 years later, Jay still has strangers coming up to her in the street. They all ask the same thing: "Are you Matty's mum?" For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that story from Nate and Nick Trubridge, we'll put it up on our website so that you can watch the video. Some of you getting in touch about Brian Shaw, who's terminally ill, wanting to settle with Vero. This person says, "I know exactly what Brian is going through, still struggling after 19 years with another claim, clearly. Hope is nothing but delayed disappointment," they say. Another listener says nobody should be waiting for an earthquake settlement even after 5 years.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister is staying out of a stoush between Australia and Facebook. The social media giant is blocking Australians from accessing news content on its site in response to a proposed law requiring both it and Google to pay news publishers. Jacinda Ardern says Australia has taken a different path to New Zealand in how it deals with Facebook. She says anything that doesn't sit right with New Zealanders she raises with Facebook, the Christchurch terror attacks being one example. The editor-in-chief of New Zealand's largest independent news website says there are global implications to Facebook's decision. Patrick Crutzen says he would support the rollout of sterner legislation against Facebook in Aotearoa.
What the Australian Code has going for it is that it recognises that there's an enormous power imbalance and that they can't negotiate as equal partners, and it recognises the essential value of high-quality news in a democracy.
Staff's Editor-in-Chief Patrick Crutzen. More than 27,000 people in the Auckland region have been tested for COVID-19 since the Papatoetoe outbreak was announced on Sunday. Health officials say it's the second busiest round of testing since the peak levels reached during the August outbreak. The head of the county's Manukau District Health Board, Margie Upper, says the high volume of testing should provide reassurance that every effort is being made to detect COVID-19 in the community. No new cases have been reported today. Family members of the Papatoetoe High School students are among those tested today. 3 of the school students are currently infected. The father of another student says he's hoping to return to work next week with a negative test result.
I work at another school, so I've come in to have a test so that when I go back to school on Monday, I can show them that I've got a negative result and I can go back to work in a safe way. My boy's test was negative and this will be my second test, so it's just precautionary. We'll go from there.
A man whose son attends Papatoetoe High School. A man battling to get his quake-damaged apartment fixed says he doesn't know if it will be restored to its former glory before he dies from terminal cancer. The New Brighton beachfront apartments in Christchurch were damaged in the 2011 earthquake, and for the past 5 years the owners have tried in vain to get the insurance company Vero to cover the cost of repair. One owner, Brian Shaw, who has been diagnosed with terminal cancer, told Checkpoint he wants an apology from Vero for their behaviour.
We need Vero's cooperation to get this out of the way, and they, as I say, they have just deliberately put obstacles in the way in the hope that we'll run out of energy, run out of money, run out of resolve, but that's not going to happen.
Vero says it wants to resolve the situation as quickly as possible and has apologised for the delay. The Wellington City Council has narrowly voted in favour of a plan to privatise part of the Central Library and slash the book buying budget. The Mayor, Andy Foster, had tabled the motion at today's long-term plan committee meeting. He said it was a way of getting the library reopened on time and within the council's targeted debt level, and would not be privatisation. The proposal will be consulted on and voted on again when the long-term plan is finalised. The missing yacht that broadcast a Mayday call last night has been found 150 kilometres north of its broadcast location, apparently with the two people on board safe and sound. Maritime New Zealand says it will tomorrow talk to the skipper of the yacht, Tribe, to discuss what happened and what can be learned from the incident. It was located in Bream Bay, a few nautical miles south of Whangarei. It's not known yet why the call was made and why it was not rescinded sooner. It's 4 minutes past 6. Naomi Osaka is through to her second Australian Tennis Open final in 3 years. The 2019 winner has just beaten 23-time Grand Slam singles champion Serena Williams 6-3, 6-4 in their semi-final in Melbourne.
It was an honour to play her, and I just didn't want to go out really bad, so I just wanted to try my best.
Naomi Osaka will face the winner of this evening's semi-final between Karolina Muchova and Jennifer Brady in Saturday's tournament decider. America's Cup organisers have announced the Challenger final will resume on Saturday, weather permitting. The Challenger of record Luna Rossa had wanted racing in the best of 13 series restarted tomorrow, but now appears to have settled for a Saturday resumption. 2 races are scheduled with a further 2 on Sunday. Luna Rossa is 3 wins away from earning the right to challenge Team New Zealand for the America's Cup. The Blues are relieved they're able to resume their preparations for the Super Rugby Aotearoa season. Their players were unable to train for the first 3 days of the week while Auckland was at alert level 3. Coach Leon McDonald says they felt like they were being left behind.
Got the America's Cup in Auckland and it felt a little bit like a boat at the starting blocks down off the foils, and everyone else has taken off through the gates and down the road. So to get back on the grass today has been great.
The Blues will play a game of 3 halves against the Chiefs and Crusaders in Cambridge on Saturday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance goes on a Weka survey. Motoko Kakabarashi's on the line from Japan, soon to mark the 10th anniversary of the devastating quake and tsunami which left over 15,000 dead, 2,000 of which are still missing. And physicist Dr. Eloise Devant teases the facts out of the fiction that is dodecanium, the metal which forms the protective shell for Doctor Who's arch enemies. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For all of the North Island except Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, fine weather apart from 1 or 2 showers in eastern Northland until tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated light showers, clearing tonight. For all the South Island, fine apart from cloudy areas in Westland and Southland, mainly morning and night. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few light showers until tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Hello again. This is Checkpoint. If you are just joining us, I'm Lisa Owen. There are no new cases of COVID-19 reported in the community today, following Auckland's move to Alert Level 2 and the rest of the country's shift back to Level 1. The good news will bring relief to many, but especially to those in one South Auckland suburb. In the latest outbreak, 3 Papatoetoe High School students tested positive for the virus. Our reporter Kate Gregan visited the school today and has this report.
It's been a frantic few days for the staff, students and families of Papatoetoe High School. On Sunday, it was revealed that one of the 3 confirmed community cases attends the South Auckland school. Yesterday, 2 more students were confirmed to have COVID-19. Despite this, the principal, Vaughan Quayo, says today hasn't been as anxious.
Yeah, this time yesterday was a little bit sort of crikey as we got a couple of extra new positive cases, and so we then did a whole lot of number crunching in the background, trying to work out who could be the potential new close contacts. But then as the day transpired and we worked out what the infectious period was, we realised that circle wasn't growing from a school perspective.
He says he can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
So we went from anything could have happened to this time yesterday yesterday to a little bit more calm and a little bit more, well, the alert levels went down, right? So in terms of job done, it's not quite job done, but we're certainly getting to the end of the woods.
The school's testing centre remained relatively quiet throughout the day, but many of those who were tested were family members of students.
My son's a student at Parliamentary High, and I work at another school, so I've come in to have a test so that when I go back to school on Monday, I can show them that I've got a negative result and I can go back to work in a safe way.
This woman's daughter also attends the school. She said the new cases are concerning, but it's important people get tested.
I'm worried about yes, but it's our responsibility. It's whole, the nation responsibility to do everyone. So we know that everything is fine.
This mother also has a student who attends Papatoetoe High. She says while she doesn't have any concerns, she's followed advice to get swabbed.
Yeah, well, my son's testing came through negative, so that's really good for our family, but we have been advised that we need to come and test, so yeah, no, we're pretty good.
One of the busiest COVID-19 testing centres during the current outbreak has been in the car park behind Otara Town Centre. Otara is just a few kilometres from Papatoetoe, and a subway there had been visited by a positive case. South Seas Healthcare Chief Executive Silau Vaisalasefu runs the testing station. He says despite the alert level change, the station's surprisingly busy.
There's still some anxiety in the community, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it just goes to show that I think the community responds really, really well.
He said within just 4 hours today, 350 cars had come through the testing station. That's an increase from the day before, when 322 cars arrived over the whole day. This local man was in line to get swabbed after following health advice.
So we're just getting tested because we went to one of those point of interest where the contact visited, Bunnings Manukau, so I haven't been to work all week, been told to stand down 3 days and then get a test afterwards.
He said it's important people get tested for the communities in South Auckland and the rest of New Zealand.
It has come back up, so I guess this is just stamping it out and just making sure that everyone's doing their bit.
This man agrees, saying the country's gone through this before and can do it again.
We got this, New Zealand.
Papatoetoe High School will remain closed for the rest of the week. Staff, students and their families are required to isolate at home until Monday and cannot return to school without a negative test. For Checkpoint, this is Kate Gregan.
A company working to set up a fund to support frontline ambulance workers says it's being blocked in its efforts by St John. Yellow Halo is an internet service provider which will return 100% of its profits to help frontline ambulance staff. But the business has hit a hurdle with the country's largest ambulance provider, St John, moving to oppose its efforts to secure a trademark. Nita Blake-Person has the story.
When Graham Blake's daughter was 6 days old, she came scarily close to dying. He and his wife have never forgotten those who saved her life.
Had trouble breathing and we thought we were about to lose her, and a couple of paramedics swooped in and saved the day, and we'll forever be grateful.
The Waikato-based businessman wants to repay the efforts of those paramedics with a new charity supporting frontline ambulance officers. The funds will come from a newly set up residential internet provider called Yellow Halo. Paramedics would be able to apply to the fund for everything from scholarships to grants and some time out with access to holiday homes.
The business has been set up to provide 100% of its profits to the Yellow Halo Ambo's First Trust, and that then gets distributed as the trustees wish, and the trustees are predominantly ambulance officers themselves. So it's them looking after their own.
The trust first launched in November, and former St John paramedic Dorothy Johnston is a trustee. She says there's been huge support from her colleagues.
Well, we were just actually blown away because no one has ever done anything like that for us before, It's a great idea. It's a very simple idea when you think about it, but no one has ever done it.
But the business has hit a snag. Graham Blake has applied to the Intellectual Property Office to have Yellow Halo trademarked. But they've since found out St John, the company's largest ambulance provider, has asked the IPO for an extension so they can file an opposition to the application.
looks like we're being challenged by a big organisation, with, I guess, a lot more resource than we have. I mean, this is literally my business partner, my wife and I trying to do a good thing here by setting up a really cool initiative, and it actually feels quite intimidating.
Yellow Halo had previously approached St John about their plans, but the discussions fell flat. Graham Blake doesn't know what their issue is now.
I've got no idea what their agenda is here, because we're not in the same classification. We're not, in terms of trademark protection, we're not even in the same classification. So we're scratching our heads.
Yellow Halo's trademark lawyer, Tim Walden, says he's in the dark too.
I can only assume that St John isn't happy with, altogether happy with what the business of Yellow Halo is and how that's being carried out, and are looking at whether or not they have any rights that they could rely on to successfully interrupt the business of Yellow Halo.
St John declined to be interviewed for this story, but in a one-line statement told Checkpoint it is reviewing information and working through a process as we do with any commercial interests. As for the fund itself, it would be available to all ambulance staff, including those who work for Wellington Free or rescue helicopter outfits. Dorothy Johnston says she can't understand what St John's issue is.
Why would they do this to their staff? Just why would they take something away from their staff which doesn't really affect them at all? Just their staff's unhappiness, but they're used to doing that, aren't they?
Graham Blake has spent around $100,000 of his own money getting Yellow Halo off the ground, money he could have donated as cash but had hoped to create a system which keeps giving back.
They go on TV and tell the nation how under-resourced they are. Why are they spending money on trademark attorneys to beat up on an outfit that's trying to help their sector? I don't know. I don't get it.
St John has until the 28th of February to formally oppose the application. It's a deadline Graham Blake hopes will pass without any drama so he can get on with supporting staff who do so much to support New Zealanders. For Checkpoint, Corneta Blake-Person, TNA.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The gates are firmly shut to international tourists at the moment, and the government's being told to use this time wisely. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment says tourism is putting the country under major pressure and action is needed to make the industry work better for the country. He's suggesting a departure tax, visitor limits in popular destinations and tighter controls in conservation areas. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
The recommendations include cracking down on freedom camping and ensuring any government funding for tourism infrastructure is conditional on environmental criteria. But Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment Simon Upton expects the proposed departure tax could garner the most debate. It's based on the UK model, and Mr Upton says it would work out to be about $25 extra to fly to Australia and $120 to get to the other side of the world. Revenue would then be used to help develop low-emissions aviation technologies and provide a source of climate finance for Pacific Island nations.
They are a gaping hole, really, in climate responses. We can take account of aviation emissions inside New Zealand through our emissions trading scheme. There's all sorts of things we can do domestically, but when the Climate Commission came up with its recommendations the other day, it had to leave international aviation out. It's not within its brief. So that was a very big gap, and I wanted to propose something practical that related to the problem.
He doesn't believe it will deter tourists from travelling here, but Tourism Minister Stuart Nash isn't on board with a departure tax, despite supporting the core focus of sustainability.
Personally, I'm not a fan of it. I have to have a good hard look at Simon's recommendations, but we've got the international visitor levy, which tourists pay as they come into the country. So I'm not a fan of a departure tax.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the border is already heavily taxed and many will question adding a further financial barrier to travel. But he backed plans for the government to give tourism infrastructure funding to places with a destination management plan.
It's using a carrot
I guess, to say to regions, if you are going to be able to access funding, you need to show that you've thought about how you're managing your destination. Have you consulted properly with your community?
He says most tourism businesses are in survival mode, but that doesn't mean the industry shouldn't try to become more sustainable. The report says it's widely understood Milford Sound often breaches its daily visitor limit of 4,000 people. It suggested a few options to enforce visitor limits at popular destinations, including charging access fees or rationing access to a first-in, first-served basis. Simon Upton wants the rules governing the Department of Conservation to have a shake-up, saying it's hindering their ability to enforce visitor limits.
DOC really needs to have tools, and there needs to be a debate about which tools it should have. Currently, it's having to find workarounds in some of these cases by trying to limit access to car parks and push people onto buses and so on and so forth. It's unfair to ask the department to have to work around rather than to have tools that it can use.
Rotorua Canopy Tours General Manager Paul Button says it appears to be a well-thought-out plan.
The true impact of tourism is carbon emissions. Maybe we start with looking where our clients come from. You know, if they come from New Zealand, if they're domestic, their carbon footprint is not only less to get to their destination, it's also less impact because they're holidaying at home, they're not holidaying abroad.
Simon Upton wants to see progress made this calendar year, saying there's a limited window to make tourism more sustainable. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Period products will soon be free for all primary, intermediate, secondary school and kura students. More than 3,000 students in Waikato have already been receiving the products as part of a trial of the program. But now the scheme will be rolled out nationwide at a cost of $25 million over the next 3 years. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher with the details.
Jacinta Gula-Sacrum from Dignity New Zealand has long been campaigning to make period products more accessible, and she's thrilled by news they'll be free at all schools and kura.
It means that students are able to partake in their sporting activities and they're able to actually be a young person and have a life.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says no one should miss out on school because of their period.
We have 1 in 12 students affected here who are potentially missing school as a result of something that 50% of our population experiences.
It won't just be free products. Students have asked for practical information about periods too.
I don't think there's a complete ignorance. I'd like to think that it's a little bit different from when I was that age.
Associate Education Minister Jan Tinetti says the information will be included as part of the current refresh of the curriculum.
Girls have still said to us that they still feel a sense of embarrassment around having a period, and that is something that we need to overcome.
The nationwide rollout has the tick of approval from the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield.
I think it's fantastic.
Dr Bloomfield says period poverty is a real challenge for many young people.
We should be doing something about that, and I think it particularly is great for our lower socioeconomic groups, more likely to be Māori and Pacifica young women, and so I just think it's a fantastic move.
The Ministry of Education is managing the rollout with suppliers, with the first products due to arrive at schools and kura in June, or the end of Term 2. Schools and kura must opt in by March to be part of the program, but will be able to take part at a later date if they don't sign up for the initiative by then. Ātuiti whare parimata, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
Severe snow and ice continues to paralyse Texas, leaving millions without power, heat and now scarce access to clean water. About 21 million people are under a winter weather alert and 7 million are impacted by boil water notices. As CNN's Ed Lavandera reports, no one appears to be taking responsibility as it turns into a political blame game.
The deep Texas freeze is inflicting pain and frustration across the state. For 3 days, millions of people have been unable to heat their homes, temperatures dropping to life-threatening levels and causing chaos. Linda Shoemaker had to leave her home for a warm shelter to protect her 101-year-old mother.
Mother said, I'm going to stay home and, cover up with all my quilts. I said, no, you could freeze in the middle of the night.
The bitter cold has now turned to heated anger over the catastrophic failure of the state's power grid. Texas Governor Greg Abbott made the rounds on Texas television news programs to say it's a total failure of the organization known as ERCOT, which runs nearly all of the state's power grid. He's called for an investigation and for executives to resign.
ERCOT stands for Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and they showed that they were not reliable.
Most of Texas runs on its own power grid separate from the rest of the country. State leaders designed it this way to avoid federal regulation. ERCOT officials insist the decision to take power away from millions of homes using controlled outages spared the entire state from a system-wide failure that could have taken months to repair and left even more people freezing.
If we had waited and not done outages, not reduced demand to reflect what was going on the overall system, we could have drifted towards a blackout.
According to ERCOT officials, equipment failures at oil and gas plants account for the largest amounts of power knocked offline. Despite that, right-wing pundits have used the Texas freeze to blast the reliability of renewable energy sources like wind and solar power. In the middle of this crisis, Governor Abbott went on Fox News.
This shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal.
But before the governor made that appearance, he was telling Texas news stations that one of the biggest concerns was frozen equipment at natural gas plants, which provides most of the heat for Texas homes.
The power generators froze up and their equipment was incapable of generating power. And then on top of that, the natural gas that flows into those power generators, that is frozen up also.
There's no Green New Deal in Texas. That is a JOKE joke.
Democratic Texas Congressman Mark Vesey says the governor and state Republican leaders are trying to shift blame.
I would say 100% of the blame goes to Greg Abbott and the Republicans just for years and years of neglect and mismanagement.
In the meantime, Texans like Jose Limon scramble to survive. Limon recently spent 3 weeks in a hospital ICU battling COVID-19. He's home now with no electricity, using a generator to power the oxygen machine he needs to breathe.
And that report from CNN. As New Zealand's vaccinators prepare to be jabbed themselves tomorrow, Japan has begun vaccinating its healthcare workers in a desperate bid to host the Olympics. The country plans to vaccinate 3.7 million health workers from early March, followed by 36 million people aged over 65 beginning in April, as it races against the Olympic clock. Libby Hogan reports.
Japan kicked off its COVID-19 inoculation drive on Wednesday, the last of the group of 7 nations to begin a major vaccine drive. First in line to roll up their sleeves were Tokyo medical workers, including 37-year-old nurse Junko Hasegawa.
I was a bit nervous as I work in a place which has a higher risk of infection. By getting vaccinated, I think I can work with a little more reassurance.
But Japan faces a big hurdle, a shortage of syringes, meaning millions of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines could go to waste. The government made urgent requests to manufacturers, but they're struggling to ramp up production. It's the latest headache for Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who is struggling to win public support. He's trying to defy the odds by pushing ahead with the Tokyo Olympics, set to start this July. Though daily cases are in decline, Tokyo and several prefectures remain in a state of emergency to stop the virus from spreading. Japan has signed contracts to get a combined total of 314 million doses from Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Moderna, more than enough for their population. Still, a complete vaccine rollout for millions of medical staff and tens of millions of people aged 65 and above could take more than a year, many months beyond the Olympic timeline.
And that was Libby Hogan reporting. To the US now, where a 106-year-old woman has received a vaccine on wheels. Paramedics paid a special home visit to the centenarian who survived the Spanish flu pandemic as a toddler. The mother of 12 said even if the vaccine gave her a few more days, it would be worth it to have her family visit again. Yahira Yaquez reports.
Maria Torres is 106 years old. Knitting and solving crossword puzzles is how the mother of 12 passes the time in her small apartment in Los Angeles, California. For the last couple of weeks, Torres, a native from Guerrero, Mexico, who migrated to the U.S. in 1976, had been asking her grandson, Frankie Mercado, for the COVID-19 vaccine.
I heard that someone who gets vaccinated doesn't die soon, and that's what I don't want yet. I want to live some more days. Whatever God grants me, but my will is that, to last more days.
But Mercado couldn't imagine taking his grandmother, who uses a walker, out of the apartment and driving her to a vaccination clinic. Just getting Torres from the kitchen to her bedroom is an ordeal. Enter CJ Bartholomew, a nurse manager for Care Ambulance.
And when I heard, we have this lady who's 106 years old. She survived the last pandemic, and she's really not able to leave her house. I figured coming in for a few hours on the weekend is the least I could do.
On February 13th, Bartholomew paid Torres a visit to administer the vaccine.
That's it.
Nurse Bartholomew stayed for 30 minutes after he gave her the vaccine to observe any reaction in Torres, who is healthy but has type 2 diabetes. He emphasized that the house call was a special occasion, and as much as they would like to help more people like Torres, their resources are limited. Her grandson was thankful, saying he can't imagine life without the woman who has raised him since he was 5.
I don't want her to be separated from me, and she's lived this long life, and the last thing I would want for her is to die alone, and I can't visit her.
This is the second pandemic Torres has lived through. She was a toddler during the 1918 Spanish flu. With one shot down and another to go, Torres says she hopes family and friends will soon start visiting again.
Wow, 106 years old. Wow, we've had a lot of feedback from you on housing and also on insurance claims. On Brian Shaw, terminally ill man. He's been waiting 10 years between EQC and Vero to get his claim settled. This listener says it's really easy. The government should put a time frame on insurance companies resolving claims of 5 years, or else they should pay up in full. And the sentiment is the same from most of you. It's not good to have kids growing up in motel rooms. We've got to do something.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The editor-in-chief of the Stuff News website says Facebook's decision to restrict news access in Australia is a gross overreaction to a law proposing it pay news publishers. More than 27,000 have been tested in Auckland since Sunday, when the Papatoetoe COVID outbreak was announced, but the number of confirmed cases stands at 6. A Hamilton vehicle testing station has been ordered to pay $500,000 in fines and reparations after an employee driving on-site hit and killed a customer 2 years ago. The Wellington City Council has voted in favour of a plan to privatise part of the Central Library to help cover the costs of strengthening work. The broadcaster Marcus Lush has won an empty seat on the Invercargill City Council by a large margin. Our next news and weather